Billionaire adopts black baby he found in a park. Years later, he received a shocking surprise. A cold, lonely billionaire finds a newborn abandoned in a park and makes one choice that shocks the world. He raises the child as his own, ignoring whispers, judgment, and quiet racism that follows them everywhere. The boy grows up loved at home, but never fully accepted outside it. Then, years later, as the billionaire lies dying, a sealed secret comes to light. A truth hidden since the very day the baby was found. A truth so powerful it changes everything the son believes about love, money, and betrayal. The child was never just abandoned. The father was never just rich. So when the truth finally surfaces, was this adoption an act of kindness or the greatest sacrifice of all? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The bitter cold of winter cut through the pre-dawn darkness as Edgar Whitmore stepped out of his warm brownstone. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air while he methodically adjusted his cashmere scarf and pulled on his leather gloves, the same way he had done every morning for the past 15 years. The city slumbered around him, with only the occasional rumble of early delivery trucks breaking the silence. 5:15 a.m., right on schedule. Edgar preferred these solitary hours when the streets belonged to him alone. His polished Oxford shoes clicked against the sidewalk as he made his way toward City Park, following his precisely planned route. The park wasn't the most direct path to his office, but it offered what he valued most: space from others. At this hour, the winding paths were deserted, allowing him to maintain the careful distance he kept from the rest of humanity. The old oak trees stood like silent sentinels, their bare branches reaching up into the dark sky. Edgar walked with measured steps, his mind already organizing the day ahead. Meetings, calls, investment strategies. Numbers were reliable, clean, uncomplicated. Unlike people, they never demanded more than he was willing to give. A sound broke through his thoughts, so faint he almost missed it. Edgar stopped, his body tensing. There it was again. A weak cry, barely louder than a whisper. It came from somewhere near the cluster of benches beneath the largest oak tree. He should keep walking. Whatever it wasn't his concern. The cry came again, and something in its helplessness made his feet move toward it instead of away. The weak whimpers led him to a park bench, its wooden slats covered in a thin layer of frost. There, partially hidden by shadows, lay a small bundle wrapped in what looked like a thin blanket. Edgar's heart began to pound as he drew closer. The bundle moved slightly, and another cry emerged. "Dear God," he whispered, his carefully maintained composure cracking as he realized what he was seeing. A baby, impossibly small and clearly newborn, lay abandoned on the frozen bench. The thin blanket provided almost no protection against the brutal cold, and the child's dark skin had taken on a frightening bluish tinge. Edgar stood frozen, his mind racing. He should call emergency services. Let the proper authorities handle this. It was the logical course of action. But the baby's cries were growing weaker, and the morning air seemed to grow colder with each passing second. His hands trembled as he reached down, something deep inside him overriding his usual calculated restraint. The baby was ice cold to the touch as he carefully lifted the bundle. Without thinking, he opened his heavy wool coat and held the child against his chest, trying to share his warmth. "Hold on, little one," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion he didn't want to examine too closely. He pulled out his phone with his free hand, dialing 911 as he began walking quickly towards the park entrance. The operator's voice came through clearly. 911, what's your emergency?" "I found an abandoned newborn in City Park," Edgar said, his usual measured tone strained. Near the oak grove. The baby is severely cold. Send an ambulance immediately. Time seemed to blur as he waited. The baby's cries had weakened to small whimpers, and Edgar found himself swaying gently, an instinctive motion he didn't even realize he was making. He kept one hand pressed against the small bundle, monitoring the shallow rise and fall of breathing. The wail of sirens split the dawn air. Red and blue lights painted the trees as police cars and an ambulance arrived. Paramedics rushed toward him with a stretcher and emergency equipment. A female paramedic reached for the baby, but Edgar found himself hesitating for a fraction of a second before carefully transferring the bundle. Male infant, African American, probably only hours old. The paramedic called out, quickly assessing the situation. Severe hypothermia. We need to get him warmed up now. A police officer approached Edgar, notebook in hand. Sir, can you tell me exactly where you found the baby? Edgar answered their questions mechanically, watching as the paramedics worked on the tiny form. He heard them discussing foster care placement, temporary custody, child services. The words stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. I'll take responsibility for him, Edgar heard himself say, surprising everyone, including himself. The words had bypassed his usually meticulous decision-making process and simply emerged. The police officer blinked. Sir, there are procedures. My name is Edgar Whitmore, he said, drawing himself up to his full height. I have the resources and means to provide immediate care and protection for this child. You can verify my identity and credentials. I'm willing to sign whatever paperwork is necessary. His name had the desired effect. The officer's eyebrows rose in recognition. Everyone knew of Whitmore Financial Group. A flurry of phone calls followed as they loaded the baby into the ambulance. Edgar insisted on riding along, his carefully planned schedule forgotten. At the hospital, he watched through the nursery window as medical staff worked to slowly warm the infant's tiny body. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring vital signs. The morning light was beginning to stream through the windows, painting everything in soft gold. Edgar stood motionless, his usual iron control wavering as he studied the small face. The baby's color had improved, and his breathing had steadied. Something unfamiliar and uncomfortable squeezed in Edgar's chest as he watched those tiny fingers flex and curl. He pressed one hand against the glass, allowing himself to acknowledge the foreign ache spreading through him. It felt dangerously like caring, like connection, like everything he had spent years carefully avoiding. The sun continued its slow rise, warming the cold window beneath his palm as he stood guard over the sleeping infant, unable, or perhaps unwilling, to move away. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed steadily as Edgar sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his usually pristine suit wrinkled from hours of waiting. A parade of officials had been cycling through since dawn. Police detectives, social workers, hospital administrators, and now his own lawyers summoned by urgent phone calls. Mr. Whitmore, a social worker named Ms. Martinez said, consulting her clipboard, I need to understand why you're pursuing this. Emergency guardianship is typically reserved for family members or established foster parents. Edgar straightened his tie, a habit born of countless business negotiations. The circumstances are unusual, I acknowledge that, but I found this child, and I have the means to provide immediate, quality care. And your experience with infants? She pressed. Limited, Edgar admitted, but I have the resources to hire qualified help immediately. The baby needs stability now, not bureaucratic delays. Detective Roberts, who had been investigating the abandonment case, leaned against the wall. Baby boy Doe will need specialized care. The exposure to cold, I've already arranged for a private pediatric team. Edgar interrupted. Dr. Sarah Chen is flying in from Boston Children's Hospital this afternoon. The detective's eyebrows rose. You move fast, Mr. Whitmore. It's what I do. Edgar's voice was quiet but firm. Every minute spent debating is a minute wasted. Through the nursery window, he could see 2 nurses tending to the baby, who was finally sleeping peacefully under the warming lights. Someone had tucked a tiny blue teddy bear beside him. Hospital protocol for abandoned infants. The sight made Edgar's chest tighten inexplicably. By mid-morning, word had leaked to the media. Local news vans began appearing in the hospital parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward the grey winter sky. Edgar instructed his security team to coordinate with hospital staff to ensure privacy. He wouldn't allow this child's story to become fodder for the evening news. Your background check is clean, Ms. Martinez said, returning with more papers. But, Mr. Whitmore, I need to be direct. A single man with no childcare experience taking in an abandoned infant, it raises questions. Edgar met her gaze steadily. What happened this morning wasn't planned, but I believe in taking responsibility for the situations we encounter. That baby was left in my path, and I have the ability to help. It's that simple. She studied him for a long moment. Nothing about this is simple, Mr. Whitmore. Around noon, Edgar's personal assistant arrived with fresh clothes and necessary supplies. The hospital hallway had become an impromptu office, with lawyers making calls and security personnel monitoring the growing media presence. Edgar signed documents, made arrangements, and kept one eye constantly on the nursery window. Dr. Chen arrived at 2 o'clock, immediately taking charge of the baby's care. Her presence seemed to ease some of the social workers' concerns. Edgar had chosen her specifically for her expertise with at-risk newborns, but also for her no-nonsense approach that matched his own. The baby is stable, she reported after her examination, but he'll need careful monitoring for the next several weeks. I'm concerned about potential complications from the hypothermia. Edgar nodded, already making mental notes. Whatever's necessary. As the afternoon wore on, the constant questions and decisions began to wear on him. He found himself walking to the hospital chapel, seeking not prayer, but simply silence. The small room was empty, sunlight filtering through stained glass to create pools of color on the floor. He sat in the last pew, finally allowing his rigid posture to relax slightly. The events of the morning felt surreal. In the space of a few hours, his carefully ordered life had been completely upended. He should be concerned about that. He should be reconsidering this impulsive decision. Instead, he found himself remembering the weight of that small bundle against his chest, the desperate need to protect overwhelming his usual caution. The memory wouldn't let him go. The chapel door opened quietly, and Ms. Martinez entered. She sat beside him without speaking for several minutes. The emergency guardianship papers are ready, she said finally. But I want you to understand, this is just the beginning. There will be home studies, follow-up visits, evaluations. I understand, Edgar replied. I'm prepared for whatever's necessary. She handed him a pen and the thick stack of documents. Sign on the highlighted lines, and Mr. Whitmore, that little boy is going to need more than just resources. He's going to need love. Edgar's hand paused briefly over the paper. I know, he said softly. By evening, the paperwork was complete. Dr. Chen had arranged for a private ambulance transport, and Edgar's house staff had been frantically preparing for their new arrival. But when it came time to leave, Edgar insisted on carrying the baby himself. The hospital staff helped him properly secure the car seat, showing him how to check the straps and support the baby's head. The drive home was silent, except for the occasional soft sounds from the sleeping infant. Edgar's mansion stood dark against the night sky as his car pulled through the gates. The structure had always seemed appropriately impressive before, a symbol of his success. Now, for the first time, it struck him as cold, forbidding. He carried the car seat carefully up the front steps, his security team hovering nearby. The heavy front door opened silently on well-oiled hinges. Edgar paused in the marble foyer, looking around with new eyes at the pristine surfaces and valuable artifacts. Nothing here was designed for a child. Nothing here suggested warmth or comfort or love. The baby stirred, making a small sound of distress. Without thinking, Edgar reached down to gentle him, his large hand carefully cradling the tiny head. "It's all right," he murmured, surprising himself with the tenderness in his voice. "We'll figure this out together." He climbed the sweeping staircase slowly, each step echoing in the silent house. The newly prepared nursery waited at the end of the hall, its door standing open. Edgar had spared no expense. The best crib, the highest-rated monitoring systems, everything a baby could need. But standing in the doorway, he realized all the expensive items couldn't disguise the fundamental truth. This house had never held a child before. The baby's eyes opened briefly as Edgar carefully lifted him from the car seat. Dark eyes met his, and tiny fingers curled reflexively around his thumb. Something shifted permanently in Edgar's chest at that simple touch, a door opening that he knew would never fully close again. The first rays of morning sunlight crept through the mansion's windows, finding Edgar already awake in his study. He hadn't slept much, spending most of the night reviewing pediatric care materials on his tablet. A baby's cry echoed through the house's intercoms, causing several staff members to freeze in their morning routines. Mrs. Peterson, the cook, nearly dropped her mixing bowl. "Good heavens," she whispered, staring at the ceiling. The butler, James, stood rigidly by the kitchen door, his usually impeccable composure slightly rattled. The gardener peered in through the window, curiosity evident on his weathered face. Only Kylie Carter, the housekeeper, moved with purpose. She set down her cleaning supplies and headed straight for the nursery, her practical shoes making soft sounds on the marble floors. Her calm efficiency seemed to highlight everyone else's uncertainty. Edgar emerged from his study, watching as his usually well-ordered household struggled to adjust to this new reality. The baby's cries grew more insistent. "Sir," James approached cautiously, "should we perhaps call for a nurse?" Before Edgar could respond, Kylie's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Whitmore, would you mind bringing up one of those bottles Dr. Chen prepared? They're in the kitchen fridge." Edgar found himself in the kitchen, where Mrs. Peterson wordlessly handed him a warm bottle. She'd already heated it perfectly, though her hands shook slightly as she tested the temperature. In the nursery, Kylie sat in the rocking chair, holding the fussing infant with natural ease. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in its usual neat bun, her practical clothes spotless despite the early hour. She looked up as Edgar entered, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "There we are," she said softly, reaching for the bottle. "Someone's hungry this morning, aren't you, little one?" Edgar stood awkwardly by the door, watching as she fed the baby with practiced movements. The infant's cries immediately quieted to soft, suckling sounds. "You've done this before," he observed. Kylie nodded, her attention on the baby. "3 children of my own, all grown now, plus 8 grandchildren." She adjusted the bottle slightly. "Babies aren't nearly as fragile as they look, Mr. Whitmore. They mainly need love, patience, and consistency." Throughout the morning, Kylie moved through baby care tasks with gentle confidence. She showed the other staff members how to prepare bottles, demonstrated proper burping techniques, and gave quiet instructions about sterilizing equipment. Edgar observed it all from various doorways and corners, taking mental notes but maintaining his distance. After lunch, Kylie drew a warm bath in the specially installed baby tub. "Would you like to learn how to bathe him?" she asked Edgar. He shook his head, retreating a step. "I have meetings." Indeed, his afternoon was filled with lawyers in his home office. Stanley Crawford, his lead attorney, spread documents across the mahogany desk while speaking in careful terms. "The media attention is already significant," Stanley reported. "We need to consider the optics carefully. A white billionaire adopting a black child will draw scrutiny from all sides." Edgar's expression remained impassive. "The optics are irrelevant." "They're not irrelevant to a family court judge." Another lawyer interjected. "There will be questions about cultural competency, about your ability to address this child's unique needs and identity." "Then we'll answer those questions," Edgar stated firmly. The legal team exchanged glances. "There are other options," Stanley suggested gently. "We could find a more suitable family. Make sure the child is well provided for financially while avoiding potential complications." Edgar's chair scraped back as he stood. "This meeting is over. Mr. Whitmore, please consider—" "I said this meeting is over." His voice was quiet but left no room for argument. As the lawyers gathered there, papers, Kylie appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's time for his feeding." Edgar followed her to the nursery, where she efficiently prepared a bottle. "They're not entirely wrong," she said as she tested the temperature. "It won't be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Edgar replied. She smiled slightly. "Would you like to feed him this time?" Edgar hesitated, then slowly sat in the rocking chair. Kylie placed the baby in his arms, adjusting his hold until the infant was properly supported. "There you go," she murmured. "Just tilt the bottle slightly." "Perfect." Edgar stared down at the tiny face. The baby's dark eyes were open, looking up at him as he ate. Tiny fingers curled around Edgar's thumb again, and that same protective feeling swelled in his chest. "He needs a name," Kylie said softly. "We can't keep calling him the baby." Edgar was quiet for a long moment, watching the infant's face. "Isaiah," he finally said. "His name is Isaiah." Kylie nodded approvingly. "Isaiah, it suits him." The rest of the day passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and more legal discussions. As evening fell, Kylie showed the night nurse where everything was located and gave final instructions for overnight care. Edgar worked in his study until well past midnight, unable to focus on his usual tasks. Finally, he found himself walking to the nursery. The night nurse dozed in a chair while Isaiah slept peacefully in his crib. Edgar dismissed the nurse for a coffee break, then stood by the crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of Isaiah's chest. The room was quiet except for soft breathing sounds. Moonlight filtered through the windows, casting a gentle glow over the sleeping infant. He remained there long after the nurse returned, listening to those quiet breaths. Each one seemed to weave another strand of connection, binding him more tightly to this tiny person who had so unexpectedly entered his life. The expensive monitoring systems blinked their reassuring lights. The temperature was perfect, the humidity exactly right. Everything that money could provide was in place. But standing there in the darkness, Edgar realized that the lawyer's concerns about cultural differences and public opinion meant nothing compared to the simple truth of this moment. This child needed him, and somehow he needed this child too. The days began blending together in a rhythm of 2-hour intervals. Edgar found himself learning a new language of midnight feedings and early morning cries. His normally precise schedule adapted to match Isaiah's needs, though dark circles formed under his eyes from the constant interruptions to his sleep. 2:15 a.m. feeding complete, he muttered into his phone's note-taking app, trying to track patterns in Isaiah's schedule. The baby dozed in his arms, milk-drunk and content. Edgar had insisted on taking some of the night shifts himself, despite having a full staff of qualified nurses. Something about these Quiet moments felt sacred. The weeks ticked by, marked by doctor's appointments that Edgar attended personally. Dr. Chen smiled at Isaiah's progress during their third visit. "He's gaining weight beautifully," she said, making notes in his chart. "And the attachment seems to be developing well." Edgar nodded, carefully redressing Isaiah after his examination. "He's sleeping longer stretches now, almost 4 hours last night." "That's excellent progress." Dr. Chen hesitated, then added gently, "The social workers mentioned they'll be doing their first home visit next week. Are you prepared for that? The house has been thoroughly baby-proofed." Edgar replied, "We've implemented all recommended safety measures." "I meant emotionally prepared," she clarified. "These visits can be intense." Edgar's jaw tightened slightly. "We'll manage." The social workers arrived exactly on schedule the following Tuesday. Ms. Rodriguez and Mr. Thompson spent 3 hours examining every detail of the mansion, from the kitchen's bottle sanitizing station to the specialized air filtration system Edgar had installed in the nursery. "The physical environment is certainly optimal," Ms. Rodriguez noted, making careful notes. "But we need to discuss cultural considerations, Mr. Whitmore. How do you plan to help Isaiah develop a healthy racial identity?" Edgar had prepared for this question. "I've hired cultural consultants to advise me. We're developing connections with local Black community leaders and organizations. Isaiah will have mentors who reflect his heritage." "And your own education," Mr. Thompson pressed. "What steps are you taking to understand the unique challenges he'll face?" "I'm working with experts, reading extensively, and joining parent groups focused on transracial adoption." Edgar's voice remained steady. "I understand I have much to learn, but I'm committed to doing whatever is necessary for Isaiah's well-being." The questioning continued, probing Edgar's support system, his work schedule, his understanding of attachment theory. Through it all, Isaiah slept peacefully in his arms, completely unaware of the scrutiny. Media attention grew as word of the adoption spread. Headlines ranged from sympathetic to suspicious. "Billionaire's surprise baby, a heart of gold, or PR stunt?" Edgar ignored them all, focusing instead on Isaiah's newest accomplishment, holding his head up during tummy time. The peaceful routine was interrupted one morning by the sharp click of heels on marble. Margaret Hale swept into the nursery without knocking, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer suit a stark contrast to Edgar's slightly rumpled appearance. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she demanded, watching as Edgar carefully burped Isaiah after his morning bottle. "Good morning to you too, Margaret." "Don't be glib. This is serious." She paced the room, gesturing at the baby equipment surrounding them. "What were you thinking, Edgar? Taking in a random, abandoned child? Do you have any idea what this could do to your reputation? To our family's name?" Edgar continued patting Isaiah's back, his voice remaining low and calm to avoid disturbing the baby. "Our family's name will survive." "You're not thinking clearly," Margaret insisted. "This is completely impulsive, completely unlike you. Is this some sort of midlife crisis? Because there are better ways to handle that than adopting a—" "Choose your next words very carefully," Edgar interrupted, his tone carrying a warning edge. Margaret pressed her lips together. "You know what I mean. There will be talk. Questions. People will assume. Let them assume." Edgar stood, settling Isaiah against his shoulder. "I'm not discussing this further, Margaret. You can either accept my decision or leave. You're making a mistake," she said sharply. "When this all falls apart—" "Goodbye, Margaret." Edgar turned his back, focusing on Isaiah's peaceful face rather than his sister's retreating footsteps. The months passed in a blur of milestones. First smile, first laugh, first time rolling over. Edgar documented each one meticulously, building a private digital archive of Isaiah's progress. The adoption proceedings moved forward, expedited by Edgar's influence but still thorough in their evaluation. Finally, 9 months after that winter morning in the park, Edgar sat in a judge's chambers, holding Isaiah on his lap. The baby played contentedly with Edgar's tie as the judge reviewed the final paperwork. "Everything appears to be in order," she said, looking up at them over her reading glasses. "The home studies are excellent, the character references impeccable. Are you ready for the final signing, Mr. Whitmore?" Edgar looked down at Isaiah, who gave him a gummy smile in return. In that moment, the weight of the decision settled fully on his shoulders. This was forever. This tiny person would be his responsibility, his family, his son. The thought should have terrified him. This man who had spent decades carefully controlling every aspect of his life. Instead, he felt something like peace. "Yes," he said firmly, reaching for the pen. "We're ready." The judge smiled as she witnessed his signature on the adoption decree. "Congratulations, Mr. Whitmore. Isaiah is officially your son." Isaiah chose that moment to grab Edgar's tie and stuff it in his mouth, completely unimpressed by the momentous occasion. Edgar didn't mind. They had all the time in the world for moments of significance. Right now, he was content to simply hold his son and marvel at how perfectly natural that word felt. The late afternoon sun streamed through the mansion's kitchen windows, casting warm squares of light across the polished marble countertops. The kitchen had changed dramatically over the past 5 years. Colorful artwork now decorated the refrigerator, held up by alphabet magnets, and a booster seat sat tucked against the breakfast bar. Signs of childhood brightened every corner of what had once been an austere space. Isaiah sat at the kitchen table, his legs swinging freely as he concentrated on his drawing. At 5 years old, he was tall for his age, with bright eyes that missed nothing and an infectious laugh that had slowly but surely transformed the entire household. Next to him, Tommy, Kylie's 12-year-old nephew, worked on his homework, occasionally glancing at Isaiah's artwork with brotherly interest. Kylie moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, preparing an after-school snack. She had grown even more integral to their daily life, her warm presence a constant anchor for both Isaiah and Edgar. She hummed softly as she cut apple slices into perfect quarters, arranging them on plates with peanut butter and honey. "Miss Kylie," Isaiah called out, holding up his drawing. "Look, it's our family." Kylie wiped her hands on her apron and came closer to examine the artwork. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Tell me about everyone in the picture." Isaiah pointed with enthusiasm. "That's Daddy. See his suit? And that's you, and that's me in the middle." His small finger traced each figure carefully. "And up here, that's my mommy in heaven, watching over us." The words hung in the air just as Edgar stepped quietly into the doorway, returning early from work. He froze, unseen by the others, as Isaiah continued speaking to Tommy in a softer voice. "Mommy says you're my daddy," Isaiah said matter-of-factly, still focused on his drawing. "She tells me in my dreams sometimes." Edgar's breath caught in his throat. He gripped the door frame, steadying himself against the sudden wave of emotion those innocent words triggered. Kylie glanced up, noticing him, but said nothing. Her eyes held understanding and something else, a gentle challenge, perhaps, or encouragement. Tommy, unaware of the moment's weight, simply nodded. "That's nice, Isaiah. Hey, want to see how to draw a rocket ship?" The conversation moved on, but Edgar remained rooted in place, watching his son, their son, lean in eagerly to learn about rocket ships. Isaiah's dark curls caught the sunlight, his small face animated with curiosity and joy. He looked nothing like Edgar, and yet in moments like these, the connection between them felt undeniable and profound. Finally, Edgar cleared his throat and stepped fully into the kitchen. "Hello, everyone." "Daddy." Isaiah jumped up from his chair, drawing Forgotten as he launched himself at Edgar's legs. "You're home early." Edgar lifted him up, something that had become natural over the years, despite his initial awkwardness. "I thought we might try something different tonight," he said, meeting Kylie's gaze over Isaiah's head. "Would you like me to tuck you in at bedtime?" Isaiah's eyes widened. Usually Kylie handled the bedtime routine while Edgar worked late in his study. "Really, you promise?" "I promise." Edgar set him down gently. "Now, I believe Miss Kylie has prepared a snack." Evening passed in a comfortable rhythm. After Tommy went home, they had dinner together in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, another change from the old days. Isaiah chatted about his day at kindergarten, his words tumbling over each other in excitement as he described the class pet hamster and a new friend named Marcus. Bath time came next, with Isaiah splashing happily while Edgar sat nearby, answering endless questions about why boats float and where bubbles go when they pop. Edgar found himself smiling more than usual, caught up in his son's infectious enthusiasm for life's mysteries. Finally, it was time for bed. Isaiah's room had evolved from a hastily prepared nursery into a space that perfectly reflected its occupant. Walls painted a warm blue, glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, shelves filled with books and treasured toys. A framed photo of Edgar and Isaiah at the zoo sat on the bedside table, both of them grinning at the camera with identical expressions of delight. "Can we read 2 stories?" Isaiah asked hopefully as he climbed into bed, clutching his favorite stuffed elephant. "1 story," Edgar countered, settling into the reading chair. "But you may choose which one." Isaiah selected Where the Wild Things Are, snuggling under his covers as Edgar began to read. His small voice chimed in on the familiar parts, eyes growing heavier as the story progressed. By the time Max sailed back over a year and in and out of weeks and through a day, Isaiah was fighting to keep his eyes open. Edgar closed the book softly. "Time for sleep, little man." "Daddy?" Isaiah's voice was drowsy. "Do you think my mommy in heaven can see me?" The question caught Edgar off guard, but he kept his voice steady. "I believe she can, and I believe she loves you very much." "I love her too," Isaiah murmured, drifting off. "And I love you, Daddy." Edgar sat there long after Isaiah's breathing had evened out into sleep, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest. The room was peaceful, filled with the subtle sounds of childhood, the soft whir of a nightlight, the faint ticking of a clock, the occasional rustle of covers as Isaiah shifted in his dreams. A quiet knock at the door drew Edgar's attention. Kylie stood there, holding a thick envelope. "This just arrived by courier," she whispered. They insisted it was urgent. Edgar took the envelope, noting the legal firm's name embossed in the corner. The paper felt heavy in his hands, weighted with possibilities he wasn't ready to face. Without opening it, he knew what it might contain. Questions about Isaiah's birth, about his biological parents, about the circumstances that had brought them all together that winter morning 5 years ago. He stood carefully, not wanting to wake Isaiah. In his study, he opened the wall safe behind a painting and placed the unopened envelope inside. The lock clicked shut with finality, but the questions it contained seemed to linger in the air. Returning to the nursery door, Edgar stood in the darkened hallway, watching his son sleep. Love and fear warred in his chest. Love for this child who had transformed his life. Fear of the truths that might threaten their carefully built world. The moonlight filtering through the window cast peaceful shadows across Isaiah's sleeping face, untroubled by the adult concerns that plagued his father's mind. For now, Edgar remained in that doorway, caught between the compelling need to protect Isaiah from every possible harm and the growing realization that some truths couldn't, and perhaps shouldn't, stay buried forever. The sealed envelope in his safe felt like a ticking clock, counting down to decisions he wasn't ready to make. The morning sun streamed through Edgar's office windows, but he barely noticed it. His mind kept drifting to the sealed envelope in his safe, its presence like a shadow in the corner of his eye. He shuffled through financial reports without really seeing them, his thoughts tangled in memories of Isaiah's childhood. He remembered Isaiah's first day of elementary school vividly. The boy had worn a brand new navy blazer and carried a backpack almost as big as he was. "You'll do great," Edgar had assured him, watching Isaiah's small shoulders square with determination. But that afternoon, Isaiah had come home quiet, his usual spark dimmed. "Some kids said I don't belong here," Isaiah had whispered later, sitting in the kitchen while Kylie made his favorite chocolate milk. "They said I'm different." Edgar's hand had tightened on his coffee cup until his knuckles went white. Kylie had given him a warning look over Isaiah's head before kneeling beside the boy. "You know what, sugar? Different is beautiful. Different is strong. Look at all the colors in a rainbow. Each one special. Each one needed." Throughout elementary school, similar incidents kept occurring. During a parent-teacher conference, Mrs. Reynolds had suggested perhaps a more suitable school environment. When Isaiah scored top marks in mathematics, Edgar had merely raised an eyebrow and doubled his annual donation to the school's scholarship fund. The message was clear. Isaiah wasn't going anywhere. Middle school brought new challenges. Isaiah joined the robotics team, his natural talent for engineering shining through, but at the first competition, another team's coach had questioned his presence, implying something inappropriate about his acceptance. Edgar had wanted to unleash his lawyers, but Kylie's quiet wisdom prevailed. "Fighting every battle for him won't help him grow strong," she'd said one evening after Isaiah had gone to bed. "Sometimes the best thing we can do is stand beside him while he learns to stand up for himself." So Edgar learned to listen more and react less. He watched proudly as Isaiah handled situations with grace beyond his years. When a security guard followed Isaiah around an upscale store, the 12-year-old had simply walked up to the man and offered to help him find whatever he was looking for. The guard had stammered an apology and disappeared. High school brought dating, driving lessons, and college applications. Isaiah's bedroom walls, once covered with superhero posters, gradually filled with engineering diagrams and robotics competition medals. He grew taller than Edgar, his voice deepened, but his laugh remained the same, bright and uninhibited. Through it all, Kylie remained their cornerstone. She was there with fresh-baked cookies after tough days, quiet encouragement during victories, and steady wisdom when either of them needed guidance. She knew when to push and when to step back, her love for Isaiah as fierce and protective as Edgar's own. The morning of Isaiah's high school graduation dawned clear and warm. Edgar sat in his office, the unopened letter still locked away, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. His phone buzzed with a text from Isaiah. "Don't forget, be there early for good seats." The graduation ceremony was held outdoors on the school's football field. Edgar found himself surrounded by proud parents clutching cameras and flowers. Kylie sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes before the ceremony even began. When Isaiah's name was called, Isaiah James Whitmore, Edgar felt his chest tighten with emotion. Isaiah crossed the stage with confident steps, his honor cords swaying with each movement. The sun caught his face as he accepted his diploma, and for a moment Edgar saw both the baby he'd found that winter morning and the young man he'd become. Pride swelled in his heart, but beneath it lay that persistent undercurrent of tension, the weight of secrets kept and truths withheld. Later during the reception, Edgar watched Isaiah move through the crowd, accepting congratulations with easy charm. He'd inherited none of Edgar's social awkwardness, instead developing a natural ability to make others feel comfortable. Several times, Isaiah glanced over at his father with a warm smile, but Edgar noticed the questions in his eyes, the same questions that had been growing stronger over the years. As photographers gathered the graduating class for pictures, Edgar stood at the edge of the crowd. Kylie appeared beside him, her presence steady as always. "He's ready?" she said softly, not looking at Edgar. "The question is, are you?" Edgar didn't answer. He watched Isaiah throw an arm around his best friend's shoulders, both of them laughing at something. The sealed envelope in his safe seemed to pulse with urgency, like a heartbeat growing stronger. The time for protecting Isaiah through silence was drawing to a close, but Edgar couldn't quite bring himself to face what that meant. The ceremony ended with the traditional tossing of caps into the air. Isaiah's soared high, catching the sunlight before falling back to earth. Edgar watched his son's face, alight with joy and possibility, and felt the familiar mix of fierce love and protective fear that had defined their relationship from the beginning. As families began to disperse, Isaiah made his way through the crowd toward them. He'd grown into such a remarkable young man, confident yet kind, brilliant yet humble. Edgar saw echoes of the courage and principles that had marked Isaiah's biological parents' lives, though he'd never spoken of them. The weight of unspoken truths hung between father and son, even in this moment of celebration. Edgar sat in his mahogany-lined office, staring at the email from Isaiah. The words blurred before his eyes as he read them again. "Dad, I've made my decision. I'm going into social work." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk, where financial projections and investment reports lay forgotten. He'd always imagined Isaiah following in his footsteps, taking over the empire he'd built. The boy certainly had the intelligence for it. His grades in economics and business courses had been exceptional. But Isaiah had other plans. Edgar's finger hovered over the reply button, dozens of carefully crafted arguments forming in his mind. He could list all the logical reasons why finance made more sense: the security, the influence, the ability to effect change through economic power. Instead, he typed 2 words: "I understand." Because he did understand, more than Isaiah knew. The choice echoed the principles of Isaiah's biological parents, though Edgar had never shared that truth. He pressed send and leaned back in his chair, remembering all the times he'd seen that same spirit of service in his son. Throughout the summer, Isaiah threw himself into preparing for his new path. Edgar would find social work textbooks scattered around the house, pages marked with sticky notes. Sometimes late at night, he'd hear Isaiah's voice from the kitchen as he discussed cases with Kylie, who listened with her usual quiet wisdom while baking his favorite cookies. "The system's broken, Dad," Isaiah said one evening as they sat down to dinner. The formal dining room felt too large for just the 2 of them, but Edgar had insisted on maintaining their regular dinner routine whenever Isaiah was home from college. "Kids falling through the cracks, families separated because they can't afford basic necessities. Someone needs to fight for them." Edgar cut his steak precisely, buying time before responding. "It's an admirable goal," he said carefully, "though there are other ways to help people, like writing checks from behind a desk." Isaiah's tone was gentle but firm. "That's important too, but I need to be on the front lines, like you were that morning in the park." Edgar's knife stilled against his plate. Isaiah rarely mentioned his adoption so directly. Looking up, he met his son's warm brown eyes across the table. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," Isaiah continued. "How different my life could have been. But you never made me feel unwanted or out of place. Even when things got tough, The looks, the questions, the assumptions. Home was always safe. You gave me that, Dad. The truth pressed against Edgar's chest like a physical weight. The moment stretched, filled with 22 years of unspoken history. He could say it now, explain everything. About the letter, about Isaiah's parents, about why that winter morning might not have been as random as it seemed. "I'm proud of you," he said instead, the words coming out rougher than intended. "Whatever path you choose." Isaiah's smile brightened the room. "Thanks, Dad. That means everything." Later that night, after Isaiah had gone up to bed, Edgar sat alone in his study. The house felt different with Isaiah home. Warmer, somehow, despite its formal furnishings and high ceilings. A framed photo on his desk caught his eye. Isaiah at age 5, gap-toothed and beaming, proudly holding up a drawing of what he claimed was their family. Edgar remembered how he'd included Kylie in the picture, giving her wild purple hair that had made her laugh for days. A sudden tightness gripped his chest, sharp enough to make him gasp. Edgar pressed his hand against his sternum, waiting for the sensation to pass. Just stress, he told himself. Too many late nights, too much coffee, too much thinking about things better left in the past. The pain eased gradually, leaving behind a dull ache and a film of cold sweat on his forehead. Edgar loosened his tie and stood carefully, moving to the wall safe hidden behind an abstract painting. His fingers moved automatically over the combination lock. Inside, beneath folders of important documents and backup drives, lay a single sealed envelope. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges over the years, but the seal remained unbroken. Edgar touched it gently, tracing the edge with one finger. The envelope contained answers about Isaiah's parents, their work, their reasons, about why they'd chosen that particular morning, that specific park bench, about the trust fund waiting for Isaiah, set up long before Edgar had entered his life, about the legacy of principle and purpose that Isaiah was unconsciously following into his chosen career. Edgar's chest twinged again, a warning he chose to ignore. He closed the safe, replacing the painting with careful precision. The truth would keep a little longer. Let Isaiah have this moment of certainty about his path forward, unmarked by complications from the past. In the silence of his study, Edgar sank back into his chair. The locked drawer beside him held the sealed documents, their presence as constant as his heartbeat. Outside his window, the city lights twinkled like stars, unchanged since that winter morning when everything in his life had shifted. He pressed his hand against his chest again, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his palm, wondering how many more secrets it could hold. The autumn breeze rustled through the curtains of Edgar's study as he stared at the medical. Reports spread across his desk. The numbers and terminology blurred together, but Dr. Samuel Reyes's concerned expression from that morning's appointment remained crystal clear in his mind. "Your heart is telling you something, Mr. Whitmore," Dr. Reyes had said, his calm voice carrying an edge of urgency. "These episodes are becoming more frequent. The medication can only do so much if you maintain this pace." Edgar shifted in his chair, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest. He'd dismissed the first few incidents as stress or indigestion, but they were harder to ignore now. The exhaustion had settled into his bones, making even routine tasks feel like mountainous endeavors. "I've seen too many successful men like yourself push past these warnings," Dr. Reyes continued, leaning forward in his chair. "They think their will can overcome their body's limits. But the heart has its own wisdom, Mr. Whitmore. Perhaps it's time to listen." In the present moment, Edgar rubbed his temples, remembering how he'd nodded non-committally. But Dr. Reyes wasn't finished. "Your son mentioned his concerns when he called my office," the doctor added quietly. That had made Edgar look up sharply. Isaiah contacted you? He's worried, and from what I can see, he has reason to be. The memory faded as Edgar heard footsteps approaching his study. Isaiah appeared in the doorway, his social worker's badge still clipped to his shirt from work. The concern in his eyes matched the doctor's. You missed dinner, Isaiah said softly. Kylie kept a plate warm for you. Edgar glanced at his watch, surprised to find it was past 8 o'clock. I lost track of time. That's happening more often lately. Isaiah moved into the room, his movements careful, as if approaching a wounded animal. Dad, we need to talk about this. There's nothing to discuss. Edgar started, but a wave of dizziness made him grip the edge of his desk. Isaiah was beside him instantly, one hand on his shoulder. See? This is what I mean. You're pushing yourself too hard. Edgar wanted to argue, to maintain the facade of strength he'd worn for so many years, but the genuine fear in his son's eyes stopped him. When had Isaiah grown so perceptive, so capable? Across the hall, in the kitchen, Kylie was quietly preparing Edgar's delayed dinner. Her lips moved in silent prayer as she worked, a habit she'd developed over the past few months as she watched Edgar's health decline. She'd noticed the changes first, the way he tired more easily, how he sometimes paused mid-sentence to catch his breath, the growing collection of prescription bottles in his medicine cabinet. The next morning, Edgar called his attorneys. They arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, carrying thick folders of documents. For 3 hours, they reviewed his estate, making adjustments and updates. Edgar's instructions were clear and precise. Isaiah would inherit everything. The company, the properties, the foundations, every asset and responsibility. Are you certain about this, Mr. Whitmore? His lead attorney asked. Given the complexity of your holdings, we could structure a graduated transfer of control. No, Edgar said firmly. Isaiah has proven himself more than capable. I want everything transferred directly to him. As they finalized the papers, Edgar felt a weight lift from his shoulders. One more piece of unfinished business settled. That evening, Edgar had Kylie arrange a proper dinner in the formal dining room. She understood without being told that this was a significant occasion, taking extra care with the settings and Isaiah's favorite dishes. Isaiah arrived home early, having sensed something important in his father's request for a formal dinner. He found Edgar already seated at the table, looking more relaxed than he had in weeks. Should I be worried? Isaiah asked lightly, taking his seat. Edgar smiled, a rare, unguarded expression. No, for once this is good news. They began their meal, the familiar routine of passing dishes and sharing simple conversation creating a comfortable atmosphere. Finally, as Kylie served coffee, Edgar cleared his throat. I met with the lawyers today, he began, to update my will. Isaiah's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Dad, let me finish, Edgar said gently. I've made you my sole heir. Everything, the company, the foundations, all of it, will pass directly to you. The silence that followed felt charged with emotion. Isaiah set down his fork carefully. I know it's not the path you would have chosen, Edgar continued. But you've shown me that your way of helping people, of making change happen, is just as valid as mine. Maybe more so. You'll be able to do both. Guide the company's resources while staying true to your calling. Isaiah's eyes glistened in the soft dining room light. Dad, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Edgar reached across the table, squeezing his son's hand. You've already shown me who you are. I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become. The moment stretched between them, years of unspoken love and respect flowing through that simple touch. In the kitchen doorway, Kylie wiped her eyes quietly, her prayers now ones of gratitude for this moment of connection. Thank you, Isaiah finally managed, his voice thick with emotion. Not just for this, for everything. For choosing me that morning, for giving me a home, a purpose. Edgar felt his own eyes growing damp. You gave me purpose too, son, more than you'll ever know. They finished their dinner in companionable silence, the warmth of their shared understanding filling the grand dining room. For once, Edgar didn't feel the weight of his secrets or the pressure of his responsibilities. In this moment, he was simply a father, sharing a meal with his son, their future clear and bright before them. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's tall windows as Edgar adjusted his tie, preparing for the small, family gathering he'd arranged. His hands trembled slightly as he buttoned his suit jacket, a reminder of his weakening condition that he chose to ignore. Downstairs, Kylie moved efficiently through the formal living room, arranging fresh flowers and ensuring everything was perfect. She knew how much this announcement meant to both Edgar and Isaiah, even if neither had said it directly. Is there anything else you need, Mr. Whitmore? She asked as Edgar descended the stairs. No, thank you, Kylie. You've done wonderfully, as always. He paused, steadying himself on the banister. Is Isaiah ready? He's in the study, sir. Been there since breakfast. Edgar nodded, understanding his son's need for quiet preparation. The doorbell chimed, and Kylie moved to answer it. Margaret Hale swept in, her designer suit and perfectly coiffed hair a stark contrast to the warmth of the home. Edgar? She said crisply, air kissing his cheek. I trust there's a good reason for this impromptu family meeting. Always straight to the point, Margaret. Edgar gestured towards the living room. Please, make yourself comfortable. We're just waiting for the others. Over the next 30 minutes, the remaining family members arrived. Cousins, a few trusted board members, those Edgar considered close enough to share this news with first. Isaiah emerged from the study just as the last guest settled in, taking his place quietly beside his father. Edgar cleared his throat, commanding attention without raising his voice. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I have an important announcement regarding the future of the Whitmore estate and companies. Margaret shifted forward in her seat, her expression hawk-like. Edgar continued, his voice steady despite his racing heart. As of yesterday, I have officially named Isaiah as my sole heir. All assets, business interests, and philanthropic foundations will pass directly to him. The silence that followed was deafening. Isaiah stood straight-backed beside his father, his face composed despite the discomfort Edgar could sense radiating from him. Years of facing scrutiny had taught him well. Margaret was the first to speak, her voice sharp as cut glass. This is rather sudden, isn't it? Surely such an important decision requires more consideration? I've had 22 years to consider it, Margaret. Edgar replied evenly. Isaiah has proven himself more than capable. But the company? Margaret pressed, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the armchair. He has no business experience, no financial background. He's a social worker, for heaven's sake. Isaiah tensed beside Edgar, but his voice remained calm. I may not have chosen finance as my career, Aunt Margaret, but I understand responsibility, and I understand people, which ultimately is what any successful business needs. Several of the board members nodded approvingly, but Margaret wasn't finished. This isn't about understanding people. This is about protecting a legacy that's been in our family for generations. Edgar, you can't, seriously. My decision is final. Edgar cut in, his tone brooking no argument. Isaiah will have the full support of the board and our existing management team. The transition plans are already in place. The gathering continued for another hour, with various family members offering congratulations or thinly veiled concerns. Through it all, Isaiah maintained his composure, though Edgar could see the toll it was taking on him. Kylie moved quietly among the guests, serving refreshments and offering silent support with her presence. As the last guests departed, Margaret lingered, her disapproval hanging heavy in the air. "This isn't over, Edgar. You're not thinking clearly." "Goodbye, Margaret," Edgar said firmly, closing the door behind her. Isaiah exhaled slowly, his shoulders finally dropping. That went about as well as expected. "You handled it beautifully," Edgar assured him, feeling a surge of pride mixed with exhaustion. The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and emails as news of the announcement spread through their business circles. By evening, Edgar was completely drained. He retired to his room early, waving off Isaiah's concerned glances. "I'm fine," he insisted. "Just tired. Nothing a good night's sleep won't fix." But at 3 o'clock in the morning, the pain hit. Sharp, crushing pressure in his chest that left him gasping. Edgar managed to reach for his phone, pressing Isaiah's number before darkness crowded his vision. The next moments were fragmented. Isaiah's voice, panicked but trying to stay calm. Kylie's prayers mixing with the wail of approaching sirens. The cold night air as they rushed him to the waiting ambulance. In the emergency room, bright lights and urgent voices swirled around him. Isaiah's hand gripped his tightly as doctors and nurses worked, their movements swift and precise. "Blood pressure's dropping," someone called out, starting another line. "Hold on, Dad," Isaiah whispered. "Please hold on." Through the haze of pain and medication, Edgar saw Kylie in the hallway, her lips moving in constant prayer. Isaiah's face above him, showing the same determination Edgar had seen earlier that day, now tinged with fear. The doctor's voice cut through the chaos. "We've stabilized him for now, but—" She pulled Isaiah aside, speaking in low tones. Edgar couldn't make out the words, but he saw his son's face change, saw the moment Isaiah understood that this was just the beginning of a longer, harder battle. The emergency room lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. Machines beeped steadily, monitoring Edgar's fragile stability. In that moment, watching his son receive the news he'd been dreading, Edgar felt both immense love and deep regret. There was still so much left unsaid, so much Isaiah needed to know. The hospital corridors felt endless during those long night hours. Isaiah sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his body cramped but unwilling to leave. The rhythmic beeping of machines from nearby rooms created an unsettling lullaby, punctuated by the soft squeaks of nurses' shoes on polished floors. Every so often, he would stand and pace, counting his steps to keep his mind occupied. 100 steps to the water fountain, 52 steps back to the nurses' station, 23 steps to peek through the small window of his father's ICU room, where Edgar lay still and pale against stark white sheets. "Mr. Whitmore?" A nurse touched his arm gently around 6 in the morning. "We need some additional paperwork for your father. Insurance information, medical history, that sort of thing." Isaiah nodded, rubbing his tired eyes. "Everything's at home in his office. I can go get it." "Take your time," she said kindly. "He's stable now, and we'll call immediately if anything changes." The drive home felt surreal in the early morning light. The mansion loomed before him, somehow both familiar and strange. Inside, Kylie was already awake, moving quietly through her morning routine despite having been at the hospital until past midnight. "How is he?" she asked, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Stable," Isaiah replied, heading toward Edgar's office. "They need some paperwork." The office was exactly as Edgar had left it the day before. Neat, organized, everything in its place. Isaiah knew where his father kept important documents, in the large mahogany filing cabinet behind the desk. He pulled open the drawer labeled Medical, searching through the meticulously arranged folders. As he lifted a thick file of insurance papers, something fell to the floor. A cream-colored envelope, sealed with wax in an old-fashioned manner. Isaiah picked it up, his heart skipping a beat as he read the words written in his father's precise handwriting. For Isaiah, only if I cannot speak. He stared at it, his fingers trembling slightly. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Edgar used for his most important correspondence. The seal was unbroken, suggesting this had been waiting here for some time. Isaiah sank into Edgar's leather chair, the envelope heavy in his hands. His father was alive, could still speak. Opening this would be wrong. And yet, the wax seal cracked easily under his thumb. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and beneath it, a USB drive. My dear Isaiah. The letter began in Edgar's distinctive script. If you are reading this, it means I am either gone or unable to tell you these truths myself. I have carried this burden for 22 years, protecting you the only way I knew how, through silence. But you deserve to know everything, especially now. The morning I found you wasn't random chance. Your biological parents had orchestrated it carefully, choosing me specifically. They were reformers within the highest levels of corporate power, people who discovered corruption so deep it threatened the foundations of our financial system. They had evidence that could have toppled empires, exposed crimes that would have shaken the world's markets. But they also knew the danger this put them, and you, in. They chose to disappear, to protect both the truth and their newborn son. They left you with me because they knew I had the resources to keep you safe and the moral compass to understand their sacrifice. The USB drive contains everything. The evidence they gathered, the money they transferred into hidden accounts, your true inheritance. The fortune I've built is substantial, but it's a fraction of what awaits you in accounts they established before they vanished. They loved you enough to give up everything, including the joy of watching you grow up. I wanted to tell you so many times, when you asked about your birth parents, when you chose social work over business, when I saw you fight against injustice with the same fire they must have had. But I was afraid of losing you, afraid of the danger this knowledge might bring, afraid you would see my silence as betrayal rather than protection. I'm sorry for carrying this secret so long. Know that every moment of raising you has been a gift, one I never deserved but will forever cherish. Whether you were placed in my path by chance or design, you became my son in every way that matters. The choice of what to do with this information is now yours. The accounts are secure, the evidence preserved. Your biological parents ensured you would have both the resources and the truth when the time came. With all my love, Dad. Isaiah's hands shook as he read the letter again, then a third time. The words blurred before his eyes as tears fell onto the expensive paper. Everything he thought he knew about his past shifted and reformed into a new reality. He thought of all the times Edgar had seemed distant, weighted down by something he wouldn't share. The strange security measures that had always seemed excessive. The way his father would sometimes watch him with an expression that mixed pride with what Isaiah now recognized as guilt. The USB drive felt impossibly heavy in his palm. Within it lay answers to questions he hadn't even known to ask, truths that could change everything. His biological parents hadn't abandoned him. They had chosen to sacrifice their own happiness to protect him. And Edgar had carried this knowledge alone for over 2 decades. Sunlight streamed through the office windows, catching dust motes in its beam. The house creaked and settled around him, familiar sounds that now seemed to echo with new meaning. In the distance, he could hear Kylie moving about the kitchen, preparing breakfast neither of them would eat. Isaiah sat there, letter in one hand and USB drive in the other, as the carefully constructed narrative of his life crumbled around him. He thought of his father lying in the hospital bed, perhaps unable to ever explain these truths in his own words. The weight of unasked questions pressed against his chest until he could barely breathe. The morning light grew stronger, throwing shadows across Edgar's desk, shadows that seemed to hold all the secrets of the past 22 years. Isaiah remained motionless, overwhelmed by revelations that transformed not only his understanding of his past, but the very foundation of his future. In his hands, the letter trembled, its pages whispering with truths too heavy to bear. Everything he thought he knew about his life, his identity, his purpose, it all shifted beneath the weight of these revelations. The world outside the office window continued its normal rhythm, unaware that within these walls, Isaiah's reality had shattered and reformed into something unrecognizable. The night settled heavily around Isaiah as he sat in his childhood bedroom, the letter and USB drive lying on his desk like accusatory artifacts from another life. Every memory, every interaction with Edgar now played through his mind with painful clarity, each one tinged with a new understanding that felt like betrayal. He remembered the countless times Edgar had seemed distant during school events, standing at the back of auditoriums while other parents crowded forward. Isaiah had always attributed it to his father's reserved nature, but now he wondered if it was fear that kept Edgar in the shadows. Fear that someone might recognize something, connect dots that were meant to stay disconnected. The night stretched endlessly as Isaiah paced his room, pausing occasionally to stare out the window at the manicured grounds below. The security lights cast long shadows across the lawn, security that had always seemed excessive, but now made terrible sense. His fingers traced the USB drive absently, its edges worn smooth as if Edgar had handled it often, perhaps wrestling with the decision to share its contents. "Master Isaiah?" Kylie's soft voice accompanied a gentle knock. "I've brought you some tea." Isaiah opened the door, finding comfort in her familiar presence despite his churning emotions. She looked at him with knowing eyes, and he wondered suddenly if she had guessed at any of this over the years. "You should try to rest," she said, setting the tea on his nightstand. "Your father needs you strong tomorrow." "My father?" Isaiah repeated, the word tasting bitter now. "Which one?" Kylie's face softened with compassion. "The one who's been here every day of your life, Isaiah. Whatever you're feeling right now, that hasn't changed." But everything had changed. As the night wore on, Isaiah replayed moments from his childhood through this new lens. Edgar's insistence on private schools with enhanced security, his careful vetting of every tutor and friend, the way he'd looked pained whenever Isaiah asked about his birth parents. Each memory shifted and reformed, revealing layers of protection and deception Isaiah had never recognized. Dawn found him exhausted, but unable to rest, his mind racing with questions only Edgar could answer. Drove to the hospital as the sun rose, his hands clenched tight around the steering wheel. The morning shift nurses recognized him, offering sympathetic smiles as he made his way to Edgar's room. But Edgar lay still and unresponsive, machines tracking his vital signs in steady electronic beats. Isaiah stood in the doorway, the letter burning a hole in his pocket, watching the rise and fall of his father's chest. All the confrontation he'd imagined during his sleepless night dissolved in the face of Edgar's vulnerability. "You couldn't trust me enough to tell me the truth," Isaiah whispered to the quiet room. "All these years, you let me believe a lie." The monitors beeped steadily, offering no response. Isaiah stepped closer to the bed, studying the face he'd known all his life, the face that had hidden such enormous secrets behind its careful mask of control. The morning light threw Edgar's features into sharp relief, making him look older, more fragile than Isaiah had ever seen him. Anger and hurt warred in Isaiah's chest, tangling with the love he couldn't deny. But the weight of deception felt too heavy to bear. Without touching Edgar, without leaving a note, Isaiah turned and walked out of the room. He moved quickly through the hospital corridors, his footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Behind him, he heard the soft rush of pursuing feet. "Isaiah, wait!" Kylie called, catching up to him near the hospital entrance. Her face was flushed from the effort, her eyes pleading. "Don't leave like this. He needs you here." "He needed to tell me the truth," Isaiah countered, his voice rough with emotion. 22 years, Kylie. He had 22 years to tell me who I really am." "He told you who you are every single day," Kylie said firmly. "Through every choice he made, every sacrifice, every moment he put your safety and happiness above his own comfort. That's who you are. His son." Isaiah shook his head, unable to find words for the storm of emotions inside him. I can't be here right now. I can't look at him and see all the lies." "Then look harder," Kylie urged, reaching for his arm. "Look past what he couldn't say and see what he showed you through his actions. He loves you, Isaiah. Everything else, all of this, it came from that love." For a moment, Isaiah hesitated. The morning sun streamed through the hospital's glass doors, warming his face, reminding him of countless mornings when Edgar had been there, steady and constant, if not always demonstrative. But the hurt was too fresh, the betrayal too raw. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, pulling away from Kylie's gentle grip. "I need time." He walked out into the bright morning, ignoring Kylie's call behind him. The hospital parking lot swam before his eyes as he made his way to his car, each step taking him further from the man who had shaped his life through both truth and secrets. Behind him, in the quiet hospital room, Edgar's eyes fluttered open briefly. His lips moved, forming a single word. "Isaiah." The nurses moved quickly to check his vital signs, but his consciousness was fleeting. By the time they called for Isaiah, he was already gone, driving away from the hospital with no clear destination in mind, leaving behind both the father who had raised him and the unanswered questions that now defined his past. Back in the hospital room, Edgar slipped back into unconsciousness, unaware that his son had been there and gone, unaware that the carefully guarded truth he'd carried for so long had finally emerged, unaware that Isaiah was now wrestling with the same burden of knowledge that had weighted Edgar's shoulders for over 2 decades. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the city park as Kylie walked slowly along the familiar paths. Her heart knew where to find Isaiah. There was only one place he could be. Sure enough, as she rounded the bend near the old oak tree, she spotted him sitting alone on the same bench where his story had begun 22 years ago. Isaiah didn't look up as she approached, his gaze fixed on the ground where scattered leaves danced in the autumn breeze. His shoulders were hunched, hands clasped tightly in his lap, the weight of revelation visible in every line of his body. "I thought I might find you here," Kylie said softly, easing onto the bench beside him. She didn't reach for him, knowing he needed space to process the storm of emotions she could see churning beneath his surface. "Did you know?" Isaiah's voice was barely above a whisper. "About my biological parents? About the money? About any of it?" Kylie shook her head slowly. "No, honey. But I knew Edgar carried something heavy all these years, something that kept him awake at night, something that made him check the security systems twice, something that made him hold back even when his heart wanted to reach out." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "That doesn't excuse the lies." "No," Kylie agreed, her voice gentle but firm. "But sometimes what looks like lies from one angle looks like love from another. Sometimes silence isn't about trust, it's about terror." A jogger passed by, and they waited in silence until the footsteps faded. The late afternoon light filtered through the oak's branches, creating shifting patterns on the ground, the same ground where Edgar had found a tiny baby on that bitter winter morning. "I've been sitting here for hours," Isaiah said, finally looking up at the tree. trying to imagine that night, trying to understand why my biological parents left me here, why Edgar chose to keep me, why nobody ever told me the truth. Kylie watched a leaf spiral down from the oak. Your biological parents made a choice out of love, to give you a chance at life, even if it meant letting you go. And Edgar, he made the same choice, in reverse, to give you life by taking you in, even knowing the risks. But he never told me. Isaiah burst out, the words seeming to tear from his throat. All these years, watching me wonder about my birth parents, watching me make up stories about why they left me, he knew everything, and he just watched me struggle. Yes, Kylie said quietly. He watched, and it broke his heart every time. But he also watched you grow strong, watched you develop compassion for others, watched you choose a path helping people who struggled just like you did. He watched, Isaiah, because sometimes watching and protecting is all a parent can do when the truth might put their child in danger. Isaiah ran his hands over his face, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with unshed tears. I don't know how to feel about any of this. The money, the danger, the secrets. It's like everything I thought I knew about my life was just a carefully constructed lie. Not everything, Kylie corrected gently. Not the love. Not the middle-of-the-night feedings when you were sick. Not the proud smile on his face at your graduation. Not the way he defended your choice to become a social worker, even when his heart was probably racing with fear for your safety. The sun was beginning to set now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Isaiah watched the colors change, his expression softening slightly as memories seemed to play across his mind. I remember, he said slowly. When I was about 7, I got really scared during a thunderstorm. Edgar wasn't good at comfort, you know that, but he sat outside my bedroom door all night. I could see his shadow under the door. He never came in, never said a word, but he stayed there until morning. Kylie nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. That's who Edgar is, standing guard, keeping watch, protecting you the only way he knows how. Sometimes love looks like silence because the truth is too dangerous to speak. But I'm not a child anymore, Isaiah protested, though his voice had lost some of its earlier anger. I could have handled the truth. Could you? Kylie asked gently. Or would knowing have changed every choice you've made, every person you've helped, every moment of normal life you've lived? Sometimes parents carry the heavy things so their children don't have to. They sat in thoughtful silence as the sunset deepened. The park had grown quiet, with only distant traffic sounds breaking the evening peace. Isaiah seemed to be wrestling with his thoughts, his expression shifting between anger, understanding, and grief. Just then, Isaiah's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. "It's Dr. Reyes," he said, his voice tightening with sudden concern. He answered the call, listening intently as Dr. Reyes spoke. Kylie watched his face pale slightly, his free hand gripping the bench edge. "I understand," he said finally. "I'll be there right away." He ended the call and stood up slowly, looking down at the bench where his life had begun. The anger hadn't completely left his face, but something else had joined it. Determination, and perhaps a glimmer of understanding. "Dad's asking for me," he said quietly. "Dr. Reyes says I need to come now." Kylie stood as well, but didn't move to touch him. This was his choice to make, his path to walk. Isaiah took one last look at the old oak tree, its branches now silhouetted against the darkening sky. In the growing dusk, it seemed to stand as a silent witness to both beginnings and endings, to choices made in love and fear, to secrets kept and truths finally revealed. "I need to know everything," he said firmly. "No more secrets, no more silence." He squared his shoulders, and in that moment, Kylie could see both the lost baby and the strong man he'd become. Whatever came next, he was ready to face it. The hospital corridor stretched long and quiet in the late evening hours. Isaiah's footsteps echoed against the polished floors as he made his way to Edgar's room, his heart pounding with each step. The familiar antiseptic smell and soft beeping of machines reminded him this wasn't just another difficult conversation. Time was precious now. He paused at the doorway, taking in the sight of Edgar propped up slightly in the hospital bed. The strong, commanding presence that had defined his father was diminished but not gone. Even now, Edgar's eyes held that sharp intelligence that had built empires and protected secrets. "Isaiah," Edgar said softly, his voice rough but clear. "You came back." "I did." Isaiah moved into the room, settling into the chair beside the bed. The anger that had driven him away earlier still simmered beneath the surface, but it was tempered now by understanding and fear. Edgar's hand moved slightly on the blanket, reaching out. After a moment's hesitation, Isaiah took it. The familiar calluses from years of writing were there, but the grip was weaker than he remembered. "I read the letter," Isaiah said quietly. "About my biological parents, about the money, about everything." Edgar nodded slowly. "I've carried that truth for so long," he said. "Every day I wanted to tell you. Every time you asked about your past, it was there on the tip of my tongue. Why didn't you?" The question came out more gently than Isaiah had intended. Edgar's eyes drifted to the window, where city lights twinkled against the dark sky. "The day I found you," he began. "I knew immediately it wasn't a simple abandonment. The documents left with you, the elaborate trust fund arrangements. Your biological parents were protecting you from something bigger than themselves." Isaiah leaned forward, finally hearing the story he'd waited a lifetime to know. "What were they protecting me from?" "Power," Edgar said simply. "The kind of power that corrupts everything it touches. Your parents were reformers, working to expose high-level corruption. They discovered something big enough that they knew they couldn't keep you safe if they stayed in your life." The machines beeped steadily in the background as Isaiah processed this. "So they left me, where they knew you would find me." A slight smile touched Edgar's lips. "They chose me because I understood power, how to use it, how to hide from it. They knew I could protect you, give you a normal life away from danger." He paused, his breathing slightly labored. "But protection meant secrets. Every time you appeared in public, every newspaper article about your adoption, I watched for signs that someone had recognized the connection. All those times you seemed distant or overprotective." Isaiah trailed off, memories shifting into new perspective. "Was love disguised as caution?" Edgar finished. "I couldn't risk someone using my obvious affection for you as a weapon, so I stayed back, stayed quiet, tried to give you room to grow while keeping you safe." Tears welled in Isaiah's eyes. "But I just thought you didn't know how to love me." Edgar's grip tightened slightly on Isaiah's hand. "I loved you from the moment I found you under that oak tree. It wasn't the money or the mystery that made me take you home. It was the way you grabbed my finger and wouldn't let go. In that moment, power meant nothing. Love meant everything." Isaiah wiped his eyes with his free hand. "All these years, I've been angry at my biological parents for abandoning me. But they didn't abandon me at all, did they? They chose to disappear so I could live." "They chose love over presence," Edgar said softly. "Just as I chose love over truth. We all did what we thought would keep you safe, help you grow strong without the weight of danger on your shoulders." The night deepened around them as they talked, filling in the gaps of 2 decades. Edgar explained about the trust fund, the security measures, the careful monitoring that had kept Isaiah safe all these years. Isaiah shared memories, seeing them anew through the lens of understanding. The security guards disguised as gardeners, the careful screening of his friends, the way Edgar had supported his career choice while adding extra protective measures behind the scenes. As midnight approached, Edgar's voice grew weaker, but his eyes remained fixed on Isaiah's face, as if memorizing every detail. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "Sorry for the secrets, for the distance, for every moment you felt less than completely loved." Isaiah shook his head, tears falling freely now. "No," he said firmly. "Don't apologize for protecting me. Don't apologize for loving me enough to carry this alone." Edgar's eyes drifted closed, but his hand remained warm in Isaiah's grip. "You were worth every silent moment," he murmured. "Worth every careful step. Worth everything." Isaiah watched as his father's breathing evened out into sleep, their hands still clasped together. In the quiet of the hospital room, surrounded by machines that marked the passing of precious time, he finally understood the full weight of what it meant to be loved, not just by the father who had raised him, but by all those who had chosen his safety over their presence, his future over their peace. The night settled around them like a gentle blanket, and Isaiah stayed, holding his father's hand, watching over his sleep, just as Edgar had watched over him for so many years. Sometimes love looked like silence, sometimes like secrets, but always, always like protection, even when it broke your own heart to give it. The machines fell silent just before dawn. Isaiah watched as the green lines went flat, feeling the warmth slowly fade from his father's hand. The moment stretched like glass, delicate and crystalline, before shattering into the harsh reality of loss. Dr. Reyes entered quietly, his footsteps echoing in the sterile room. He checked Edgar's vital signs with gentle professionalism, then spoke softly to Isaiah. "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father was a remarkable man." Isaiah nodded, unable to find words. The world seemed muted, as if someone had turned down the volume on life itself. Outside the window, the sky was beginning to lighten, painting the city in shades of grey and purple. Edgar would have been awake by now, taking his morning walk through the park. The next few hours passed in a blur of necessary tasks. Hospital staff came and went, their voices hushed and sympathetic. Forms appeared before Isaiah requiring signatures, death certificates, release papers, funeral arrangements. Each signature felt like another goodbye. Kylie arrived as the sun cleared the horizon, her eyes red but her composure steady. She took one look at Isaiah and wrapped him in a fierce hug. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. In the hospital corridor, Isaiah watched as they wheeled his father's body away. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, making everything feel unreal. Other patients and visitors moved past, their own dramas playing out while Isaiah's world stood still. The drive home was surreal. Isaiah insisted on going to the mansion alone, despite Kylie's protests. He needed to face this new reality on his own terms. The morning traffic moved around him like water around a stone, everyone else's lives continuing as if nothing had changed. The funeral home meetings were a study in quiet efficiency. Isaiah chose a simple but elegant service, knowing his father would have appreciated the restraint. The director spoke of arrangements and options in soothing tones, while Isaiah thought about morning walks and unspoken words. Days passed in a fog of preparation. People called and visited, offering condolences and support. Margaret arrived with her usual dramatic flair, but fell unusually quiet when she saw Isaiah's grief. Even she seemed to understand that some moments demanded reverence. The memorial service was held in the garden behind the mansion, where Edgar had often walked in the evenings. A small group gathered, close friends, trusted employees, a few business associates who had earned genuine respect. The autumn air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of late roses. Isaiah stood before them, his heart pounding but his voice steady. The eulogy he had prepared felt inadequate, but he began anyway, letting his words flow from love rather than careful planning. My father found me on a winter morning. He started, his voice carrying across the quiet garden. He wasn't looking for a son. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just a man taking his morning walk who chose love when it appeared unexpectedly in his path. The gathered crowd listened intently as Isaiah continued. Many people questioned why a powerful white businessman would adopt a black baby left in a park. They looked for ulterior motives, for publicity stunts, for signs of guilt or manipulation. What they didn't understand was that my father's greatest strength wasn't his business acumen or his wealth. It was his capacity for love, even when that love had to be shown through silence and protection rather than words. Isaiah paused, looking at the faces before him. Kylie wiping tears, Margaret sitting unusually straight, Dr. Reyes nodding slightly in understanding. My father taught me that true love isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments, a light left on, a door left open, a future secured through careful planning. He carried burdens I never knew about, faced dangers I'm only beginning to understand, all to give me a chance at a normal life. Tears threatened, but Isaiah pushed through. I learned recently that my biological parents made an impossible choice to keep me safe. But Edgar Whitmore made that choice too, every single day, for 23 years. He chose to be my father not through blood, but through deliberate, determined love. He protected me, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. That's what makes him my true father, not the adoption papers, not the shared name, but the countless choices he made to put my safety and happiness above everything else. The garden was completely still now, even the birds seeming to listen. My father wasn't perfect. He struggled to show affection, to bridge the gaps between us. But his love was perfect in its constancy, in its fierce determination to give me a future unmarked by fear. He carried secrets not to deceive, but to protect, chose silence not from coldness, but from deep, unwavering love. Isaiah's voice grew stronger as he reached the end. Edgar Whitmore taught me that family isn't about blood or background or even shared experiences. It's about choice, choosing to love, choosing to protect, choosing to put someone else's needs before your own. He chose me that winter morning, and he kept choosing me every day after, even when it meant carrying heavy burdens alone. Today I choose to honor him, not just as my father, but as my protector, my guide, and my example of what love really means. May we all learn to love as fiercely and faithfully as he did. The service concluded quietly, people drifting away in small groups, their voices hushed with respect. As the sun began to set, Isaiah found himself alone in the mansion for the first time since Edgar's passing. The hall seemed different now, filled with memories instead of silence. He walked slowly through the rooms, touching familiar objects. Edgar's reading glasses left on his desk, his favorite chair still positioned to catch the evening light, his coffee cup still sitting in the kitchen where he'd left it that final morning. Each item held a story, a moment, a piece of the life they'd shared. In Edgar's study, Isaiah sat in his father's chair, surrounded by the carefully ordered world Edgar had created. The room still smelled faintly of leather and cedar, just as it always had. Outside the window, the garden where they'd just held the memorial was growing dark, the flowers fading into shadow. The mansion felt both empty and full, empty of Edgar's physical presence but filled with the evidence of his love. Every room, every object, every careful arrangement spoke of his dedication to creating a safe and stable home for his son. The silence wasn't hollow anymore. It was rich with memory and meaning. Isaiah stayed there as night fell completely, letting the darkness gather around him, feeling both the weight of loss and the strength of legacy. His father's love, once hidden behind careful masks of protection, now filled every corner of this space, as clear and powerful as morning light. Months passed like falling leaves, each one bringing new purpose to Isaiah's life. In the quiet hours of early mornings, much like his father used to keep, he worked methodically to transform the hidden fortune into something meaningful. The wealth that had once protected him would now protect others. "We'll call this one the New Dawn Foundation," Isaiah explained to Kylie one morning, spreading papers across his father's old desk. "It'll focus on emergency care for abandoned children." Kylie nodded, her warm presence as steady as ever. "Edgar would be proud of this," she said softly, arranging cups of tea between the stacks of documents. "You're turning protection into purpose." Together, they built a network of foundations spanning continents. The Winter Morning Fund provided immediate shelter for children in crisis. The Oak Tree Initiative supported foster families. Each foundation carried a piece of Isaiah's story, transformed into hope for others. Kylie remained his constant companion through it all, her quiet wisdom helping guide decisions just as she had once guided his childhood steps. She never left the mansion, choosing instead to help Isaiah make it a home for a new generation of purpose. 3 years after Edgar's passing, on a crisp autumn morning, Isaiah stood in the city park beneath the old oak tree. A small crowd gathered. Social workers, foster parents, children finding new homes through his foundations. Kylie stood at his side, her eyes bright with tears. The plaque was simple, bronze against the oak's weathered bark. Isaiah ran his fingers across the engraved letters, feeling the truth of each word. "Love found me here." "Sometimes," he said to the gathered crowd, "love comes in unexpected ways. Sometimes it finds us in our darkest moments. My father taught me that love isn't just an emotion, it's a choice we make every day. This place marks where that choice began." The morning light filtered through the oak's branches, casting dappled shadows across the plaque. In that moment, Isaiah felt the full circle of his journey, from an abandoned newborn to a man choosing to help others find their way home. Kylie squeezed his hand gently, and together they stood in the quiet morning, watching as children played nearby, their laughter echoing through the park where love had found its way home. It was 5 years after the plaque's dedication when Isaiah found himself walking familiar paths with new purpose. At 32 years old, he held the small hand of Maya, his newly adopted 4-year-old daughter, as they took their first morning walk together through the park. "Why do we come here so early, Daddy?" Maya asked, her bright eyes curious in the dawn light. Her purple winter coat sparkled with morning frost, and her breath made little clouds in the cold air. Isaiah smiled, leading her toward the old oak tree. "Because this is where my story began, sweetheart, where your grandfather found me." They stopped beneath the spreading branches, now touched with the first light of day. Maya traced the bronze plaque with her tiny fingers, just as Isaiah had done years before. "Love found me here," she read slowly, proud of her growing reading skills. "You see, early one morning, just like this one, a man named Edgar Whitmore was taking his morning walk." Isaiah began, sitting with Maya on a nearby bench. He wasn't looking for anything special that day. He was just following his routine, keeping to himself like he always did. Maya snuggled closer against the cold. "Was that Grandpa Edgar?" "Yes, that's right." And he heard something. A baby crying. "That baby was me." Isaiah wrapped his arm around his daughter. He could have kept walking. He could have left it for someone else to handle. But instead, he chose love. He chose me. The morning light strengthened as Isaiah shared the story of Edgar's transformation from a guarded, lonely man to a devoted father. He told Maya about Kylie's kindness, about growing up in the big house that was now their home, and about learning the truth of his past. "Your grandfather taught me that family isn't just about who we are born to. It's about who chooses us and who we choose in return," Isaiah explained, watching Maya's face as she absorbed every word. "Just like I chose you, Maya, just like you chose me." Maya looked up at the oak tree, its branches stretching toward the brightening sky. "Do you think Grandpa Edgar can see us?" "I think he can," Isaiah said softly. "And I think he's very happy that we found each other." They sat together in the growing warmth of the morning, watching other early risers begin their day. The park was peaceful, full of possibility, just as it had been on that winter morning so many years ago when love had first found its way home. Maya leaned her head against Isaiah's shoulder. "Can we come here every morning, Daddy, like you and Grandpa Edgar used to do?" "Yes," Isaiah answered, his heart full. "Yes, we can. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart."